back. I'm on with Ellen Brown. Ellen, let's move to your brand new article, which I guess is still a work in progress. But again, your stuff just knocks my socks off. It absolutely does. Even though I know a little bit about the Bank of International Settlements, not a whole lot, and of course it's bloody secretive, like all the other machinations going on around the world. But your working title, I guess, is called The Tower of Basel, Basel meaning Switzerland, where it's based. Do we really want the Bank for International Settlements issuing our global currency? So the article is really about this central bank owned by central bankers operating secretly, and the idea of a world currency, a global currency, meaning that central bankers, meaning the most powerful ones, would control the monetary policy of virtually every country, maybe every country, but certainly most of them, are the ones that matter the most. And the sovereignty of these countries will be just swept by the board, at least as far as their monetary policy goes. And you quoted, I guess, the original Rothschild, who I quoted in my Fed article a few years ago, I guess, that give me control of a nation's money, and I really don't care at all what kind of laws they pass. Well, that's right. I mean, the money supply is like the blood circulating through your veins. I mean, you hold that back, and all you've got is a corpse.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
exactly.
talk about this article, the BIS, and what's going on.
Well, the reason that came up is the G20 leaders, met recently, and they had met last September too. And one of the issues was they agreed to allocate $250 billion worth of special drawing rights, which were a form of currency that first was issued by the IMF in, I think, 1969, when they were trying to overcome the problem of we didn't have enough gold, so we actually went off the gold standard in 1971 because, de Gaulle traded in all his dollars for gold, and then the British tried to do it, and it would have exhausted our gold supply, so Nixon shut the gold window. But before that, they were trying to come up with some alternative form of reserve so that we could preserve our gold. And so that's why these special drawing rights were devised. But the problem is they're issued by the IMF, but the problem is that they're not really a currency. They're just sort of drawing rights, like they say. They have to be converted into a currency, which means that the powers, like if they're converted into dollars, we, the Americans, are still on the hook for the money. And typically, they've been given to third world countries when they needed some extra. So now the G20 leaders are saying that they will inject $250 billion worth of SDRs into the global economy. Well, that's not a huge amount, and it's just sort of a foot in the door. But the whole goal is quantitative easing and increasing the currency. And this was an article out of the London Telegraph by Ambrose Evans Pritchard, and he said, in doing so, they are putting a de facto world currency into play. It is outside the control of any sovereign body. Conspiracy theorists will love it. So that's the part that I jumped on. Then in the September, they were talking about, when the G20 were meeting, they were talking about who was in the position to be global banker and global policeman. They were talking about global regulations. And one former governor of the Bank of England said, the answer might already be staring us in the face in the form of the Bank for International Settlement. The IMF tends to couch its warnings about economic problems in very diplomatic language. It's too diplomatic, in other words. But the BIS is more independent and much better placed to deal with this if it is given the power to do so. So they're talking about making the BIS this global central bank. A privately owned head of the global central banking system will be issuing our global currency. Well, that is something that should definitely excite conspiracy theorists, because the BIS has had it's been very controversial ever since it was started. It was started in the 1930s, and it immediately became, it had a pro-Nazi bias, apparently. And in 1944, the Americans tried to get it shut down because the Czechs were complaining that the BIS was laundering gold stolen by the Nazis. But they didn't succeed in getting it shut down because the bankers liked having this secret club where they met. So they met for a number of years just in a hotel in Basel. It was very behind the scenes, but they did very powerful things there, set currency rates and so forth. But then they decided they needed a bigger building, and so that's when they built this really quite ugly. It's called the Boot. It's this huge building that was the one that they nicknamed the Tower of Basel. It's actually, my daughter lives in Basel, and she's 2 blocks away from that, so I've seen it, and it really is quite dark and imposing. I mean, there's no, you would have to look very hard to find where it says Bank for International Settlements. It's just a little tiny sign on it, but it's just this imposing building that kind of towers over things. So
a little different than the Eccles building in Washington, the Fed building that I guess for people who don't know the buildings, they could mistake the Supreme Court for the Eccles building, a pretty prominent building in Washington. But the BIS, I'm surprised they didn't build it underground so nobody would know about it, Ellen.
Yeah, it was described as looking like a nuclear reactor. It does. It doesn't have that sort of elegant look, like you say, like something that would look like the Supreme Court. It looks like a fortress.
But what goes on behind those walls?
Yeah, and they have their own police force. They don't pay taxes. I mean, they actually are above the law. It's exactly what Amschel Rothschild was aiming at when he said, "Allow me to issue and control a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws." And then another famous quote about the Bank for International Settlements was by Carroll Quigley, who was Bill Clinton's mentor at Georgetown University, and he wrote a book, Tragedy and Hope, a very long book. And he was supposedly a banking insider. I mean, he had been told what all this was about. He called them just the international bankers, but he said the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled in a feudalistic fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations.
And he said that
in 1966.
1966.
Yeah.
Amazing, so long ago.
Yeah.
But now, is he still living? Is Quigley still living?
No.
Oh, he would be shuddering. I'm certain he'd have a lot to say today with what's going on.
Yeah, you'd be having him on your talk show, I'm sure.
If he were alive, maybe he'd be in his 90s. It gets a little tough to get people in their 90s on the program. There are a few around I'd love to have on, Ellen, but I think they've given up doing this kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.